Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn. This episode is going to encourage you to assess what you do as a coach, what you measure your team by, and really redefine what success means. The traditional stand, of course, success means to win the championship, to win the tournament, to win the league, to go undefeated, to beat your local rivals, whatever that may look like. However, really redefining what success is, because the reality for a lot of teams and for a lot of coaches is that you may not end up winning the division. You look at leagues like the Premier League, there are 20 teams and only one team can win it. There's a really sad statistic for most soccer fans that your team will never win anything because there are so many teams vying to win. And the same applies to youth soccer. You may play in a division with 8, 9 or 10 teams, but you have to be the best one of those, or the luckiest in some instances, to have what we would identify as a traditional success. So I really want you to consider what you measure success to be for yourself, for coaching, and then for your players and for your team. And don't forget, one of the more critical elements is the parents or the guardians of the players that you're actually coaching, because they will have an expectation of success. Especially if you're part of a larger club or part of a successful club, they may have joined your club or joined your team looking to win. So you really have to identify the motives of the families that are involved in your team, and then communicate what your goals are, what your expectations are, and what is realistic. Now, you may be in a bracket with really tough teams, and the chances of winning a game or any game is really unrealistic. And of course, you're not going to say, we're not going to win any games this season. However, you can frame the experience in one way that will redefine what that success is. And that's part of what we're going to get into today. I also want you to consider, when you are looking at clubs, whether you're looking at coach profiles, if you're active on Twitter, you'll find a lot of coaches that have their information out there. A lot of coaches will pride themselves on things like their win-loss ratios, or they'll pride themselves by listing the tournaments that they've won. And for a large amount of the population in youth soccer, that's relevant. They want to be part of a team that's going to go on and win, whether that's the state cup or the local championship or whatever that may mean. But you have to really identify yourself as a coach as what is important to you, and what are these players really going to get from their experience of playing on your team. Of course, we will get into the fact that you are training and you are encouraging kids to go out there and want to win. But as in previous podcasts too, we cover the fact that that's not a controllable. You can control a lot of things, but you cannot control if you're going to win the game. You can influence the game, you can make it a big impact in your opponent's game and your own game, but you can't control the victory or the loss. So I'll start with what my approach is with my teams and within my experience of setting an expectation and setting a standard with those players and with those families, regardless of my expectation for the season. I've had teams that have gone on and won local, regional leagues, and I've had teams that have lost every single game. But I still start every season with the same, and that's within my season plan, all part of the setting up for success, which was the first podcast in this series. But then also how I keep it very simple for my teams, and I outline expected outcomes. And that never includes a win or a loss ratio or tournament expectation. So I really focus on how you as an individual are going to succeed, and what I'm going to do for you this season, what I'm going to expect of you, what I'm going to ask of you in terms of playing, in terms of commitment, in terms of your own development in and around and away from soccer. So I'll regularly use materials that do not or are not defined by the result on the weekend. So whether we're winning or losing, the players are still part of a pathway, they're still being challenged, and they're still interacting consistently, where the focus is not the win and the loss, because that's not the be-all and end-all. I coach players that are 14 years old and younger, and whilst the 14 and 13-year-olds are moving towards the competition and performance stage of their soccer career, they're still in an element where they are still developing. They still need to realize that they're not about to go on and win the World Cup, or they're not about to make or break their soccer career at a 13 or 14-year-old regional league, but they're actually learning so much that will take them further. So regardless of the win and loss, they are still developing as an individual and as a soccer player. So that's why I very rarely focus on those results. Sadly, focusing on results is something that is common, I guess we could say. It's very common because of every team having a statistic. You look at things like Got Soccer, where you can look at your regional ranking and your national ranking, and you can compare yourself to your rivals. And you know that the families of the players that you're coaching are looking at those statistics and wondering if they made the right choice in being part of your team. And you know also that parents will ask you, or clubs will ask you, what your focus is as an individual coach. And if you want to win, because everybody wants to play for a winner, which is understandable. And that goes back to my planning and my setting up for success, in that everything I do in my practice is about developing a winning mentality. Everything has a challenge to it. Everything is part of a game. Every part of practice has a winner and a loser. So I may spend time working on 1v1s, but I play it in almost like a ladder system where the winners move up and the winners play against the winners, and the losers of the 1v1s will end up playing against the losers. So there is a progression and a challenge for the players all the time to be competitive. Even when we follow our game warm-ups, where we start with 3v1s and 4v1s, there's still an element of don't be the last one in. And more so in practice than in the game environment, but I use that time and I time it where I say, we have a 30-second rondo, here we go, or a 1 minute, and the person that's in the middle has to do something silly, whether that is some kind of physical activity, whether it's a push-up or a jumping jack, but it could also be something silly like playing almost like a game of duck, duck, goose, where they run around the outside whilst the rondo continues, and then the next time that team gets to 5 passes or 10 passes, they have to do it again. So there's an element of competition for these players all the time, that if you are, quote unquote, a loser in that environment, you are effectively having to do additional work, or you are having to do something outside of what the group is doing. So you have a motivation to be a part of the group and not be the standout. And it's not in terms of creating a kind of a ha-ha, look at you, you're having to do this silly activity or this kind of physical, quote, punishment, but it's really about fostering this winning attitude from these players. And then the same goes as we move through our practices, where I want the players to be competitive, so I set goals. You score 2 goals, you flip sides. So we always use a big goal and we always use counter goals, just based on the facilities that we have within the city. So the team that is attacking the big goal, of course, wants to keep attacking the big goal. So I give reason for the team attacking the counter goals to attack the big goal, score a goal, score 2 goals, win the ball 5 times, or whatever this motivation is for them to want to win. So they get this reward of, in this case, attacking the big goal, because then you get to score the good goals and you're not just tapping the ball into an open space or a channel or a target player or something like that. So I really encourage this winning mentality within my players. How much can you challenge your players to want to win within that practice environment? And there's never a mention of, if you do this now, you are going to go and win in the game at the weekend. But you will see that your players will start relating the two together. So you are defending, but they don't really want to defend. They want to attack. That's soccer. You want to go and score more goals than the other team. So you start building in this mentality within practice, you'll find that your players will begin to have more fight in defense, because they want to get out of defense. They don't want to give up a goal. And what better way to encourage our players to be competitive than developing that within the practice environment, where not everybody is a winner, and you are going to lose in certain games, and you are going to have some form of physical activity in return for being a quote-unquote loser within that game. But that's not something that we dwell on, and it's something we move on, and it's a lesson that we encourage the players to learn from to continue to fight. And often I will be a judge of character and a judge of the game, where I see that teams have fought really hard and they've left it all on the field in terms of applying, whether it's the tactical or the technical coaching, and they've really pushed themselves. So I don't see a benefit in making kids do 10 push-ups if they've really applied themselves. If they have worked their socks off Fair play. You've done everything you can. And again, I'm encouraging you to know that you can't always win. You can go and play the best game ever, and you can't always win. So, chance as a coach to then turn around and say, why were my players unsuccessful? So that's where I am able to not just blame the players and say, you didn't try hard enough, you didn't understand it, you didn't apply yourself, or you didn't want to win. But actually, as a coach, I can reflect on my practice and say, why? Why did they give the ball away so much? Why were they not able to combine? Why were they not able to execute on the topic? So head over to my blog when you're finished with this podcast to check out my recent post on the elements of a training session. This is picked up from US Soccer, and it's identified as having 5 elements to each session. So there are certain key proponents to every practice that you can run that when you reflect on this why, it really helps you to understand that it's not your players, but it's actually you creating the environment for your players to either succeed or to fail. So in the simplest, you can consider organization. And you can encourage your attackers to be successful by running a practice that may have 6 attackers versus 1 defender. Of course, they're going to be super successful. Now, is that relative? Does it translate to the game? Does it look like a game? Probably not. Then you may also have set up something where it is a 3v3. And your attackers are still not having success. So again, you consider the organization of that and begin to wonder why. So read that blog post. It's really interesting to see and consider the variables that you can bring to every practice. And I promise you that it will really make a difference in terms of standing there thinking, my players are the worst players ever, or they don't understand it. Why don't they understand it? What did their previous coach do to them because they are clueless? Or thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be the longest season ever and we've got no chance. Or, and some of us are very lucky on this side, where you think, my goodness, this team is the best team ever. These kids are amazing. They don't even need me as a coach because they're killing this one defender when there's 6 of them, so they look amazing. And then we get to the game, we might have a bit of a shock. But certainly take a look on that blog post and consider the elements of your training sessions to really create this environment that not only develops a winning mentality, but it creates a balanced experience for your players in that they are winning and that they are also losing. Second part of my approach to my players in terms of redefining success is hitting on the buzzword right now, which is holistic. It's this holistic player development. It's all about the individual as a person as they are as a soccer player. And I use a couple of different approaches to working with my players to encourage them to focus on more than results. And they're both available on my website. They are identified as the power questions that I ask my players at various points throughout the practice, throughout the game, throughout the season. They're key questions that I just keep in my pocket that I can engage with the player whenever I see that a result or a situation is beginning to affect them in negative ways. So we may be winning and it may be too easy and they become the clown of the team. And then we may also be losing and they may also be a super negative person within that environment that's not helping. So key questions that are pertinent to that individual. What could you have done there? What are you bringing to this situation? What are you doing? How can you help? And these are really powerful questions that encourage an individual to reassess their environment. It's not about how many goals can you score? How can you score a goal to help us through this? But what is your contribution in this moment? If this player has the ball, how are you supporting that player? Not how are you getting the ball from that player to go and score a goal, but how are you supporting them? How are you maintaining as your position or your role within this team? And then the second thing I use is what we call a peak performance approach, where I encourage the players to set goals for themselves. And I use it monthly, where I will say, what is your soccer goal for the month? What is your personal goal for the month? And then I'll throw in a couple of additional goals each month too, just something that's a little different for them to focus on. Again, something that is not specific to a win or a loss within a game. And because it's completely player-led, I will often review with that player and then ask them if they think it's appropriate or if it's just something they pulled out of thin air because they just had to write something down. So I'll say, you have said that your team goal is that we're going to win games. Well, we know that that's not something we can control. So what can you do as part of this team, or what can you expect of this team that could influence a win, definitely more positively than negatively? And then we can reframe the goal like that, because this kid may try their hardest in a certain aspect for their team goal, and then we don't win a game. So then that's deemed as a failure, again, because we're measuring ourselves on this success of winning, which is something that we don't necessarily have control of. And I'll also set goals for the players from myself. I want you to do this, or I think you can do this, or I think that last month you had this great approach and I really want you to do the same thing again this month, and here's how we're going to increase that. Then I'll also ask the players to identify key traits within a soccer player, and then key traits that are important to them as soccer players too. So what do you think you can bring to this team, or what do you think is really important to you as a soccer player? So if dribbling is one of the key attributes for you, especially because you might be a winger and you get the ball at your feet a lot, or you've got good speed, but you need to improve your dribbling, that's a conversation I have with my player. So then I encourage them to rate themselves every month out of 10. What are you at right now? Not in comparison to last month, but right now. So you're an 8 out of 10 right now. That's great. And I actually agree with you. I think that my regular coaching with you will encourage you to try something different or do things a little differently to encourage you to get to a 9 or to a 10. And then next month I meet with that player again and I have a conversation with them and I say, I see that you put yourself at a 9 out of 10. Is that accurate? Do you think so? Because I may think a little differently. Or I just like to keep them honest and say, well, here's the deal. You get to 10 out of 10 right now in the next month, then where are you going to go from there? Is that it? You've achieved perfection at dribbling. So I definitely keep the level of expectation on these players very real, that, again, it's not about the wins and the losses, but it's absolutely about you as an individual that is developing in multiple ways, and one of those ways is soccer. So you're not necessarily in an environment where you need to be winning. You're not working with players that are 16 years old and above, where it's about performance and not about development so much. What happens when this focus on development doesn't lead to results? What happens when you continue to go to games and you are losing 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, 7-1? And I've had that experience, and I'm currently going through something very similar right now. So how do I deal with that? How am I able to engage the players still? How am I able to appease parents who are expecting these wins? And especially if you join a big club where winning is very important, or maybe an environment and a culture of winning is very important to a lot of the membership of your team, then that's something that you have to identify with them early on. And part of that comes from the setting up for success and some of the material I mentioned earlier in this chat, where I talk about developing this mentality in practice that you can go and win, or you want to go and win, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to win. So part of my approach to every game is to use the same setup. I use the same pre-game routine. It's available on my website, and I follow it because A, it's very simple. B, my coaching has already happened during the week, so there's nothing that I can implement before the game that isn't going to confuse my players or possibly undo all of the coaching that I've had during the week. And C, it helps keep the players focused with no surprises, no new understanding or expectations on them. It's the same thing. Within that pre-game routine is a common warm-up with some common rondos that begin with competition right away to encourage these players to be ready for the actual game and to be competitive. But I also set targets. And within those targets, it is about working within the framework from the week of practice or within the macro cycle of the month or the quarter of the year, depending on the level that you work at, of course, but really setting goals that are going to be achievable if we play well or if we play well enough. And I will often find that some of the targets can be achieved within a few moments of the game, and then the rest of the game we may spend trying to achieve those targets. And that to me is a measure of success. So I say to my players, I really like it when the forward players lay the ball off to a central midfielder or to a winger to then be able to go forwards, instead of breaking forwards and a player just playing a long ball or some kind of through ball that results in a foot race for the centre back and my striker, but instead play to that striker's feet first so they lay the ball off, then they can spin into the gaps and move away, and then the central midfielder who picks the ball up or the winger who picks the ball up has the space in front of them to travel and to make something happen. It's far less predictable, although now if you're listening to this and you play against me, I'm very predictable, but it gives the players a structure. It's not relying on the physical ability of a player to run 1v1 against a player, and it's not about aimlessly sending the ball down the field, but actually instilling a way of playing that is a challenge to my players. So we may lose 5-0, but the first target is how many layoffs did we get in the game? Now, we got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what was the result of those in comparison to what was the result of the times where we just played long? If we're really struggling and we don't get any layoffs, then again, I go back to the drawing board as an individual coach and say, maybe I'm not delivering it right. Maybe the game isn't right. Maybe the situation isn't right. Maybe there's lots of things, again, back to the elements of a training session that can be a factor. But if we're starting to get it, or there's just moments where it's so close and we're right there, those are positives that I am saying to the players, you did really well there. Or we haven't done so well, and here is where I think as a group you can perform better. The same for the second target, but it's a defensive focus, and I still use the same measurement. So this past weekend I used a measurement of, can you force a mistake? Every time the team gets the ball, that doesn't mean we press high. It doesn't mean that we hold back with a low back line and we wait for them to make a decision. We set a trap. We create an environment where we shape our play to force that player into a mistake. So I use things like visual cues. If he takes a bad touch, that's a moment you can go and force a mistake. So then they become clever in identifying the right moments to force a mistake. Not the right moment to steal the ball and hopefully score a goal, but that will come from it. It's really about these players making decisions that are going to be best for us as a team and not just this real amateur, if you like, approach to win the ball, score a goal. And of course, there are stats out there that will identify, and I'll put these in the notes too, how many goals are scored within several seconds of winning possession. And that's totally valid. But the point I'm trying to get at is that I set these targets for my players to begin to read the game more. And it's not the be-all and end-all to let a team have possession whilst you're waiting for the right moment. And actually, that's when counterattacks can be most effective. So it works within that statistic, but I'm reframing it in a way that my players understand. And it's not a way of saying, keep a clean sheet, but it's really about, can you force mistakes? And then we conceded 5 goals. How many times within that build-up or within that phase of play when they scored, could we have forced a mistake? Or how many goals did we prevent because we forced mistakes? These are measurable targets that we have control over by attempting to play within that framework, within that style of play. And it's something that I've had a lot of success with to help encourage these players to not focus on the end result. Now, of course, it's going to be there, oh, we lost 5-0. However, some of the most positive feelings I've had with my players is games that we've lost and said, you know what, we actually played really well there. And unfortunately, we don't pay enough respect to our opponents in youth soccer. They were always cheating, or they were always rougher than us, or they were always they always played a bad way of playing soccer. So they always kicked the ball over the top and chased after it and just out-muscled us. Or the referee was bad and that's why we lost. And it's very rare for a team or for a coach or for a parent at that fact to say, they were really good today. They were really good at this, this, and this, and that's why they beat us. Yes, they may have had a really strong individual, especially as you get to 12 and 13 years old, which is an area that I'm working in right now. And you've got boys that have hit puberty and have facial hair. And then you have the younger side of 12 where they're still small and they're still growing and they're looking up to players that look like their dads. So using targets is a real tool to reframe your game experience for your players. And that's something that I do communicate with parents too. These were our game targets. We work in an environment that encourages winning and promotes winning. But these are moments that I recognize for us that are going to be important in us pushing towards a victory, pushing towards more goals, or pushing towards more clean sheets and encouraging these players further down the road in their development. Because remember, we're still in a development phase. Winning is lovely. I love to win. Who doesn't want to win? Every coach is out there to win a game. You've probably seen some of the behavior from the sideline, but it's really about this individual. And to me, part of winning is this player moving on as a successful player from a positive experience playing with me. And sadly, that's missed far too much from this competitive pay-to-play model where some reason there's an expectation that when you pay money to a club or to a coach, that automatically results in victories because, again, back to statistics such as Got Soccer, your team is nationally ranked and nobody wants to be ranked 1,227th at 2006 boys. They would rather be ranked number one. And it's just completely unrealistic in terms of the holistic approach to player development for 99.999% teams. Again, think of the Premier League. Only one team can be up there. But there is no reason why we cannot foster a development environment and challenge every single player to be successful and to develop without them needing to be on a number one seeded team. So to recap, set your stall out, set your standards and your expectations. If you really think this is going to be a tough season, be fair with your families, be fair with your players and outline that it is going to be tough. You are playing against top teams, you're playing against tough opponents that play in certain ways that you may have experience with, but being completely honest and then framing the practices and the season plan in a way that is going to focus on those individuals will set you up for the best success. Then set your game routine. Feel free to use mine. It is so simple. It's something I introduce to every practice too, and we warm up the same way so that it's not an alien approach. And then I use the targets. And my final gem I'll give you is to huddle up. When you talk to your players, get them together, link arms, join up, and be a team. Don't let players sit down and play with their laces or figure out where their shin guards are or any of that because they're not paying attention, they're not engaged. As a team, I am telling you we are discussing what our targets are. I am telling you what I think. You are telling me what you think. And part of my team environment is that we respect each other. There's no wrong answer, but there is certainly an answer that we can take and develop into a winning answer for us for sure. And part of that comes from us linking up. We communicate in a way that everybody is listening and everybody is respectful. And so there it is. That's my simple approach to my players. And I say simple, and it really takes some work. It really takes a lot of effort and a lot of commitment. You'll see the material on my website with the power questions that you need to keep in your pocket all the time and show that you really care about an individual and not just play up that you care, but really genuinely caring enough for them to feel like they can open up with you. They can be honest with you. They can share any issues that they have with you. And then using things like peak performance, where you rely on them to be honest about their own standards and then engage with them about it. So it really takes work to not only set this framework, but to consistently deliver on that framework. I will also set myself targets for the month, and I'll share those with my players, and then I will deliver on them. So I had a personal target of performing 10 double unders when I go to the gym with the jump rope. I filmed it. I got 2 in a row. I was honest and I filmed it and I sent it to my players and said, I tried. It's just so hard. I only got 2, and here's evidence of me having 2. So not only do they know that I am keeping myself accountable, I'm keeping them accountable, but I can fail too. It's okay to fail because I was trying. And that's something that we forget about a lot too. Remember, it's a holistic approach for your player. They are growing into people. They're making decisions. They're going to be a part of society that we want to be proud of, not just be proud of them if they suddenly make it to the MLS and they're on a big-time contract. Stay focused with your season plan. Commit to your players as individuals and as a team for development. Results will come. They will come. Whether that's because you end up in a lower bracket, which is commonly the easiest way to go and find results, or you, for some reason, decide that a friendly against a weaker opposition is really what's needed. Whatever it takes, building this cohesive team that focus on those individuals as people will be one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. Losing sucks. It really sucks, and it's really tough, but somebody's got to lose. And at the moment, that's your team. You reframe it in a positive way. Losing is also winning, and you can take that away. So check back next week. There will be a part 2 to this episode in which I consider you as the coach and what you are doing for your own personal development too. So we talked a lot today about what you can do for your players and for team cohesion, but for you as a coach to consistently improve. So how you go about your planning of practice, how you are reading games, how you are applying yourself away from the field also. So be sure to check back next week for that. In the meantime, please share this with other coaches, with other soccer people that you know that may be looking and experiencing something similar, whether that is as an individual that's on a losing team, or if that's somebody that's just got into coaching and is struggling to find their way through the game because they're finding themselves on the losing end of games quite often. Thank you so much for listening. Check me out, as always, on Twitter @LeeDunSoccer. A huge thank you to Tactical Pad for sponsoring today's episode again. Use their digital gifts for showing your players and for planning yourself. Really helps you redefine success because you can identify moments of success in every practice based on what your practice design was, so you can show significant improvements for all of your players and redefine that success that it's not all about winning. Thank you again for listening, and check back next week for part 2.